Group, the trade organization, is facing disruption after 20 years of preventing trade wars. That's Larry Summers. That's Brunswick CEO. Or no, Larry Summers. Larry Summers is his boss. Brunswick CEO Neil Wolin interviews his former boss, Larry Summers, at a Brunswick event in the New York office. Larry has, among the many things he's done, been the chief economist of the World Bank. In the Clinton presidency, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was the president of Harvard. Came back to public service in the Obama administration. Was the head of the National Economic Council at the White House in the midst of the financial crisis. He is now the Charles Eliot Professor at Harvard. And he is, it's fair to say, a leading public intellectual on a ridiculously wide range of topics concerning economic policy and public policy more generally. So thank you, Larry, for being there. He says, I've had the very good fortune when I was the Secretary of the Treasury to have Neil as my general counsel. In that capacity, Neil was crucial in the negotiation of a very complex standstill on $100 billion plus of Korean debt. When for a brief moment it appeared that there would be some overall agreement between the government and the gun manufacturers, Neil was its architect, and Neil also had the unfortunate responsibility of having to enforce the Treasury's ethics codes. Well, he remembers when he arrived at the United Airlines counter as Secretary of the Treasury with my Secret Service detail, and United Airlines reacted to my presence by offering an upgrade. My chief of staff called Neil to inquire whether I could expect the upgrade, and Neil inquired whether there was any spaces available in coach. Unfortunately, there were spaces in coach. Blah, 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 laughter. Tax reform, potential growth effects. Earlier in the week, 137 economists wrote an open letter saying there would be all kinds of growth effects. What is your judgment about the chance, either in the short term or the long term, that tax reform would actually lead to incremental economic growth? You can't rule out, this is what Larry Summers said, you can't rule out the possibility that the tax cut will lead to a substantial acceleration in growth, but it's not anybody's sensible best guess. If you read that letter you just referenced, you'll see that the conservative economists who wrote it quoted 3 studies, and the quotations are just badly wrong from 2 of them. And when I say badly wrong, I mean that if a Harvard student did what they did, citing only the high end of growth estimates and the sources being quoted, I would call it dishonest. You've been a strong proponent of this idea of secular stagnation. We've got inflation that seems to be anchored substantially below 2%. What do you make of it? And what set of things that are politically achievable are likely to bring us out of this dynamic? He says, it's a bit of a mystery. You would have thought that when the unemployment rate was this low and there were this many people saying they had vacancies to fill, there'd be more wage pressure. And if you had told me every other variable and you'd asked me to guess the inflation rate, I would have guessed higher than what's played out. My guess is that people are more fundamentally scared by the combination of the recent recession experience, the possibility of their job being outsourced to India, and the possibility a robot will start to do their job. that you just have very quiescent labor, and with very quiescent labor, you don't get wage pressure. And without wage pressure, you don't get inflation. That said, what we all just need to get used to is that for the last 40 years, even 60 years, the labor force has grown reasonably fast. It's grown reasonably fast because we've had significant immigration, because people used to average having 3 kids, and because more and more women were entering the labor force. The adult labor force was growing at 1.5%-ish a year. Going forward, the adult labor force is not going to grow. If the economy works as well as it used to, it's going to grow substantially slower than it used to. And that's just life. It's okay. It's sort of more like GDP per person that we care about than it is the total quantity of GDP. In that sense, slower growth is baked in demographically. On top of that, there's much less call for physical investment than there used to be, because people shop electronically rather than go to malls, because a law firm that used to need 1,400 square feet of space per lawyer now needs 700 square feet because it stores things in the cloud, because of whatever it is that's causing our leading tech companies like Google and Apple to be rolling in cash without full uses for cash. All those things combined with rising savings because people are living longer, because more capital is coming from abroad, because more of the income's going to rich people, all that means you got a lot of savings. You don't have much investment. That means low interest rates. That means high asset prices because the savings flow into the existing assets. That means limited demand pressure, which means a tendency to sluggish growth. And it means a tendency to low inflation. And it raises a question whether you had good growth under these circumstances. Is it financially sustainable? And if ordered to grow at a reasonable rate, you need to have stock prices go up 20% a year. Well, hello, that's not going to keep happening for 5 or 10 more years. In the 2000s, we had the mother of all housing bubbles. We had a vast erosion of credit standards, and it's not like the economy was on fire. The economy was kind of okay. The sense of rapid growth over the last couple of years, is that some new, strong, sustainable foundation, or is that something that goes with stock prices going up 20% a year? And if in order to grow at a reasonable rate, you need to have stock prices go up around 20% a year, well, hello, that's not going to keep happening for 5 or 10 more years. There's a question whether the economy is more brittle than many people imagine. We have a playbook for fighting recessions in the United States. That playbook is the Fed cuts rates by 500 basis points, by 5% points. Given where rates are now and given where people think they're going, it's going to be a very long time before there's anything like 5 percentage points of room to cut rates in the event of a recession. I kind of feel like we're living on borrowed time. But if it turns out that inflation drifts up 2%, things stay moderate. Debts don't accumulate. The markets are kind of broadly stable, not rallying, and growth stays great for another decade. Then I'll have been wrong. And I don't preclude that possibility at all. What policy would help push things in that direction? He says, I look around and see the average American pays the equivalent of 60 or 70 cents a gallon gasoline tax and extra automobile repairs because we don't do a good job of maintaining our roads. The Democrats say a bunch of it is unwillingness to allocate money, and they are right. The Republicans say that the regulations are so crazy and that it takes years to build a simple bridge, and they're right. Too. I mean, people estimate that the 2nd Avenue subway cost 5 times as much to build per mile as the subway in Paris. You know, the French They have unions. They have all the stuff we don't, like, and they did it for 1/5 of the cost per mile as what we did. To widen the aperture, what do you think of the path the United States is taking in its engagement with the world, especially in the economic sphere? You have to come to a judgment. Do you think the 70-some years since World War II have basically been good years for the U.S., or do you think they've been bad years? It seems to me it's pretty obvious that they've been good years. There hasn't been another war. Americans really live vastly different than they used to, and they've been fantastic years for humanity as a whole. And that's had a lot to do with a relatively open international system in which there was big growth in trade, big growth in the flow of capital, big growth in the flow of ideas. U.S. Deputy Secretary Neil Wolin, Treasury Secretary, far left, stands with Secretary Tim Geithner and First Lady Michelle Obama in 2010. She was speaking to Treasury employees in Washington, D.C. I think it's pretty obvious that it was the right strategy, and while I've had past years bitterly decried the policies of the presidents I didn't serve, I think if you take the large view, what I just described has been something that's been supported in a broad bipartisan way since World War II, and that is under challenge. Gary Cohn and H.R. McMaster, who would be viewed as the establishment edge of the Trump administration, took to the Wall Street Journal some months ago to proclaim that there's no such thing as an international community. There's only the constant struggle between nations. That seems to me to be a very dangerous area, and ultimately that hurts American business when it tries to do things abroad. It leads other nations to retrench and focus on their own advantage rather than cooperation. It causes us to be excluded. Do you buy the argument that international economic policies plays into the PRC's hand? Is this all good news if you're the People's Republic? The system of basically open global markets, opportunities to export foreign investment, ability to send hundreds of thousands of people to U.S. universities to learn how to do artificial intelligence and go home and start companies doing artificial intelligence. This liberal system has really been pretty good stuff for China. So if that system collapses, I'm not sure it's going to be quite that terrific for them. What politically viable options are there for us as a country to try to make important headway on the persistent problem of inequality? My suspicion is that this trend towards increasing inequality may not, of its own volition, change. This is why we need more progressive taxation. This is why we need more progressive taxation, not less. Holy hell, I don't like this guy. This is why we need more progressive taxation, not less. This is why we need to be doing more about the geographic element, both putting more capital and more things that are new into the decaying parts of our country, and at the same time making it easier for people to move into more productive hubs and hotspots in our economy. We are surely making a big business as a country by spending much less on the education of the 70% of our population that is not going to graduate from college than most other countries do. There is a lot that one can do that is enormously productive and enormously satisfying without a college degree. Germany, in particular, does a great job in respect to this problem, but we don't do it. People take it as a given that technology helps the skilled, but technology will replace Wall Street traders long before it replaces gardeners. I'm over here on the Brunswick group. Kick to the face. Let me show you. Let me show you about Brunswick Group here. Who we are. Hold on. Let's just go to the front page, please. Unbelievable. Brunswick is an advisory firm specializing in business critical issues. We help clients navigate the interconnected financial, political, and social worlds to build trusted relationships with all their stakeholders, from financial situations through capital markets, crisis, cyber, employee engagement, and litigation. Clients rely on Brunswick for insight, advice, planning, preparedness, and campaigns. Our purpose is to help the great value creating organizations of the world play a more successful role in society. Intelligence, articles, white papers, surveys, and reports from the Brunswick Partnership and community. Larry Summers. Italy at the crossroads. Brunswick looks at the main factors influencing the forthcoming general elections in Italy, possibly outcomes and their impact on business. Silicon Valley investment strategies. Should tech giants spend their cash by acquisitions, or should we just stop trying to guess? Our people. This is Sir Alan Parker. That's Louise Charlatan. Take a gaze into this guy's eyes. Andrew Fenwick, co-founder, vice chairman, chief financial officer. That's Susan Gilchrist, global clients. That's Robert Pinker, emerging markets. You know who that is? That's Neil Wolin, the guy that was interviewing Larry Summers, that we just read. That is Helen James, Chief Operating Officer, or CEO to you and me. Or COO, I'm sorry, COO. This is their app, Brunswick Intelligence app. Download our brand new web app and get all the very latest Brunswick thinking wherever you are. app.brunswickgroup.com on your mobile device. Our specialist offers for every business critical event and issue in the life of a company. We have specialist teams with the experience and expertise to provide senior advice and integrated solutions. Financial situations, crisis, investor engagement, employee engagement, regulatory and public affairs, litigation communications, cybersecurity, business and society, inclusion and diversity, M&A, IPO, shareholder activism, geopolitical. Crisis? Can I steal that picture? That would be a negative. They're not letting me steal that. I want it. No. Hold on. Just touch it on down. Crisis leadership is a better mindset than crisis management. We are proud of the clients we represent and aware of the trust and responsibility they place in us. That responsibility is felt most sharply at times of crisis. Successful crisis navigation is not merely surviving, but emerging in stronger position. At Brunswick, we believe that while you may not be able to manage a crisis, you can lead through a crisis. Effective leadership is defined by the ability to quickly and clearly grasp the issues and take appropriate action. Tactical moves alone will never be enough. Leaders also need to have the right mindset and then communicate that mindset. Leading through a crisis. For more than 30 years, we have managed critical issues for clients, from tragic plane crashes to oil spills, corporate fraud to financial meltdowns, supply chain disruptions to major product recalls. We have been proud to stand by our clients at some of the most difficult moments in their histories. We have learned a lot in the process and continue to do so. With backgrounds in law, journalism, government, and communications, we are a global network of advisors, have handled corporate crisis for every description from every possible vantage point. Weathering the storm, BP oil spill, post-crisis, engage or fly low. Don't be a zombie. Be prepared. Nobody knows a crisis better than Dr. Ali Khan, who leads the U.S. government's efforts to prepare the public for disease outbreaks and health emergencies, as Brunswick's Sarah Lubman discovers. That guy's the chairman. That's global clients. But let's get back to this, please. Don't be a zombie. Be prepared. Nobody knows crisis better than Dr. Ali Khan, who leads the U.S. government's effort to prepare the public for disease outbreaks and health emergencies, as Brunswick's Sarah Lubman discovers. Soon after the March 11, 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, sought to reassure a nervous American public that the trace amount of radiation wafting over from Japan posed no harm. The agency's Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response, which pays close attention to online conversations, pays close attention to online conversations, noticed some tongue-in-cheek chatter that radiation might reanimate the dead into zombies, the premise of George Romeo's classic 1968 black and white horror movie, Night of the Living Dead. The CDC picked up the zombie meme and ran with it. A member of the CDC's communication team suggested doing a post on the agency's blog about disaster preparation tips to help readers survive a zombie apocalypse. For the record, they include a proper survival kit and emergency planning, including an agreed evacuation route. Baseball bats, a common weapon of choice against zombies, were not on the list. Former U.S. Assistant Surgeon General Dr. Ali Khan, now director of the CDC's Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response, greenlit the idea. The result went viral, and the CDC's website crashed under the onslaught of the virtual hordes. We use this as a metaphor, even though there were some natural disasters already happening, says Khan. Somehow embracing zombies allowed people to think more concretely about how they, and more importantly their family and households, were prepared. The CDC also dispensed more conventional advice after Fukushima, dispelling fears over U.S. radiation exposure and urging the public not to take potassium iodide after noticing a push for it on social media. But the zombie blog demonstrates more than a rare display of institutional creativity and humor by a government agency. It underscores the importance of flexibility and the ability to listen and respond appropriately, all essential qualities for effective crisis response, whether it is directed at a disease outbreak or a product recall. Khan honed his skills in the field as an epidemic intelligence service officer, the virus hunters who travel around the world trying to determine why people in a particular community are getting sick. Khan's work has taken him to remote regions in search of clues about transmission of diseases ranging from Ebola to SARS to the mouse-borne hantavirus. In an interview with Microbe World, when he was a disease detective, Khan described one of the more memorable hazards encountered on the job, taking blood samples from fanged monkeys in the Philippines during an Ebola outbreak. In his current role as responder-in-chief to public health threats, Khan's guiding principles are be first and be credible. He acknowledges that it isn't always easy being both, and that the agency works hard to walk a line between providing accurate science-based information and not over-reassuring the public. As he puts it, you need to acknowledge people's fears, express what you do know and what they want to know, and what you can't tell them, and when you'll have more information to tell them something. It helps that the agency can often talk with certainty about the biology of a disease outbreak, whether the cause is a virus or food contamination. We have some things that we can talk about that enhance our credibility, that are science-based and accurate, Khan said. We also then give somebody a point in the future to say, you know what, tomorrow at 3, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to tell you how many additional cases there are. Pop culture depictions of health crises have evolved. Khan regards the movie Contagion, which features both an epidemic intelligence officer and a sophisticated understanding of incubation, as a great example of Hollywood getting it right. As a witness to deserted African villages, shunned healthcare workers, and patients left to fend for themselves, Khan thinks Hollywood has come to recognize that outbreaks are scary enough in their own right without requiring any added hype. What the popular imagination and movie cameras can't capture is that day in, day out routine and rigor of the agency employs to stay on its toes. The CDC operates in the state of constant rehearsal and planning for any number of different crises, going so far as to hold mock press conferences where real members of the media are invited to attend and ask tough questions. We take that part very seriously, Khan says. We're in a public health agency. We could have the brilliant diagnosis of what happens, and if we can't communicate that, we'll never get the control measures and preventions in place. We have to be able to communicate. Mapping the future. The CDC has time-tested protocols in place for different events and disease outbreaks, with clear guidelines or critical information requirements for what needs to be flagged and how far up the chain it goes, including to Khan himself. The agency also gives training and classes around the world on emergency risk communications, working with the World Health Organization's red flags and various governments. Asked about the toughest crisis he has managed, Khan picks two. The first was the 2001 anthrax attacks in Washington, D.C., when letters containing deadly anthrax spores were mailed to several news media offices and 2 Democratic senators, killing 5 people and infecting 17 others. The second was during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when the local public health workforce was displaced. During the anthrax attacks, the defining teacher was uncertainty. Khan says you don't know what's going to happen next. You have no map to map out what the future of response is going to look like and what control strategies are going to look like, it makes it very challenging to communicate. The CDC already makes extensive use of social and digital media to listen to the public and tailor its response, as it did in the aftermath of Fukushima, by warning that the health risk of taking potassium iodide far outweighed any benefit against minimal radiation detected by highly sensitive U.S. monitoring. The agency wants to do far more and is actively exploring new ways to harness the power of the internet to aid disaster relief and disease outbreak. We're currently in the process of developing a crowd analysis tool for public use around outbreaks and other disasters, Khan says. Dubbed Project Dragonfire, the CDC envisions it as a single online source or site developed in partnership with other federal agencies and the American Red Cross Red Flags, where citizens can go to report damage and share information. To illustrate the need for a better online disaster response tool, Khan recalls his experience in the hardest hit areas of Indonesia after the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami devastation in the region. More than 280,000 people in 11 countries perished on December 26, 2004, many at the mercy of waves that reached up to 98 feet in the wake of a massive earthquake. Khan went to Aceh, one of the hardest hit areas of Indonesia, as a World Health Organization representative, Red Flags, to help coordinate the response. He saw how one NGO after another was sent to the same refugee camp, even though there were others nearby in desperate need. I think we can do a lot better at collating information and using that information to drive actions in our communities, either by our citizens or our response communities, he says. Listening and practicing. The CDC has also learned some lessons from slow-moving crisis, such as the rise of anti-vaccine advocates who have contributed to an increase in disease outbreaks, such as whooping cough. We are doing better by listening to social media to give us a more timely sense of the heartbeat of America, but we need to be more aggressive in communicating the evidence for our recommendations. Being science-based, emotionally neutral, and non-judgmental does not have to conflict with our duties to share our convictions and passion to protect our children. I hope you're starting to see the brainwashing they have on their businesses and the people. It's not necessarily a conspiracy. It might be a brainwashing top down. You get what I'm saying? What keeps Khan awake at night? The next AIDS-like epidemic, he says. Also terrorist threats, which can't be predicted. Catastrophic natural disasters, because there's nothing static about what Mother Nature will throw at us. And last but not least, continued budget cuts in public health. He estimates that there are 45,000 fewer public health practitioners at the state and local level than 5 years ago. A crisis exercise cut the interview a few minutes short. The CDC was simulating an anthrax attack, and it was time for Khan to jump in. The scenario included 1,600 spiked samples sent to the CDC to test how quickly the anthrax would be spotted. We've put some ringers in there to see if they all get picked up or not, Khan says, clearly relishing the mock problem as good preparation for a real one. So look into this Brunswick group. Just wanted to point a few things out to you. And I hope you have a good day. Goodbye. Oh, and have a good weekend too.